Before we ever see ourselves in stone, we have to first imagine ourselves as worthy of being remembered. I'm Dr. Eden Arlene, and this is Oclast, where we explore the stories art tells about who we are, what we value, and who we exclude. Today we are diving into the world of public sculpture and this cultural backlash, particularly the unveiling of Grounded in the Stars by Thomas J. Price, which is a monument that doesn't just reflect Black identity, but dares to assert it unapologetically. But what makes a sculpture controversial in 2025? Why does society seem more at ease with idealized whiteness than with authentic Black presence? Before we even begin talking about who gets a statue, we have to understand why statues matter in the first place. Public monuments are not just blocks of stone and bronze, standing in open air. They're storytellers. They don't just commemorate history, they shape it. They anchor memory. They instruct the public visually and emotionally on what is worth our admiration or our reverence or even permanence. A statue says, this person mattered. This life shaped the world. This body deserves to rise above the crowd, And for generations, those messages have been one-sided. They've largely told us that heroism looks white, male, warlike, or exceptional in a way that supports the dominant culture's narrative, So these figures are elevated literally and figuratively because their stories reinforce power structures we've inherited. But what happens when a monument shows us something different? When it centers an ordinary Black figure in quiet repose, when it doesn't seek to dazzle or dominate or conquer, but simply to exist, that's when people get uncomfortable. The literal weight of these sculptures, tons of metal, anchored in concrete, mirrors the symbolic weight that they carry. When a city places a sculpture in a public plaza, it's not just art, it's a declaration. A city is saying, this is who we value, this is part of our collective identity. That's why these debates over public monuments matter, because behind the aesthetics are ethics. Behind the marble is meaning. And behind the art is a society still negotiating who it's truly willing to see, uplift, and remember. I want you to remember our history with public sculptures and to understand the influence that Greek and Roman sculptures had on societies, around the globe. The concept of idealism for the Greeks and realism for the Romans in relation to patriotism that commemorated national figures framed the blueprint for a number of public works that came after. The human form, as depicted by the ancient Greeks, were often chiseled, nude, muscular, and athletic. So Michelangelo, who was a sculptor during the 1400s, had an obsession with ideal human forms. So much so, he was even uncomfortable with portraying himself. You see, classical sculpture, specifically the Italian Renaissance, aesthetics shaped ideas of what a universal, quote unquote, universal body should look like, which was usually male, white, muscular, and lacking emotion. So then, what happens when this ideal is interrupted by blackness, by femininity, or by truth? Let's talk about Grounded in the Stars by Thomas Price. How profound it must be to be grounded in what many view as intangible. The stars, that is. Every one of us, those who are even viewed as ordinary, can reach for the stars. Something so profound and epic, you have the ability to stand in it and be rooted to the possibility of something important. So this sculpture, it was unveiled with the optics of progress, right? Unmistakably monumental, unapologetically black. A 12-foot bronze sculpture of a young black woman standing in Times Square. Her arms are casually crossed and she has this steady gaze, right? There's no high drama, no symbolic torch or crown, just stillness, presence, power in just being. And yet, the backlash was instant. People critiqued her stance, her body, her clothes. Her very existence was called into question. The sculpture was described as, quote, uninspired, confusing, too ordinary. But what they really meant was too human, too real. Because when the subject of a statue is a young black woman with a fuller figure, someone who looks like our cousins, our students, our daughters, it challenges deeply held ideas and convictions about who deserves visibility. We're conditioned to expect abstraction, idealism, or hypersexualization when it comes to black bodies. Not nuance, dignity, or even quiet power. Grounded in the Stars isn't just a title. It's a contradiction of cultural expectations. This figure isn't floating or transcending. She is literally grounded, rooted in place, in time, in the everyday, but she's also looking up, metaphorically claiming space among the stars, among legacies that have too often excluded her. And here's what's especially important. In Times Square, one of the most photographed places on earth, there are two other statues of white men. One is of a composer by the name of George Cohen. And then there's another of Father Francis Duffy, who was a military chaplain. Now, they've stood, they're largely unquestioned. No one debates their right to occupy that public space. But let a black woman take her place, and suddenly everyone's a critic. So I ask, are we as a society truly uncomfortable with blackness? Would the ordinary made monumental? With the realness of black female embodiment in its full range, from softness to strength, from curves to confidence. Grounded in the Stars isn't alone. Kehinde Wiley, back in 2019, unveiled rumors of war in Richmond, Virginia. It faced similar scrutiny. A young black man, this is the sculpture, the monument, rocking locks, he has dreadlocks, Nike high tops and a hoodie, sitting atop a muscular horse in the same proud posture as Confederate generals once did. It was a direct and deliberate challenge to the city's long-standing visual narrative. The work wasn't subtle. It wasn't trying to whisper change. It shouted it. And that's exactly what made people uncomfortable. Wiley's sculpture told a story that many weren't ready to hear. That Wiley's sculpture told a story that many weren't ready to hear, that black masculinity deserves the same scale, the same pride, the same honor, and that the symbols of white supremacy could be reclaimed, reimagined, or dismantled altogether. Critics questioned the intention. Was it parody? Was it too confrontational? Was it art or provocation? But isn't that the point of public monuments? To provoke, to reflect the values of now, not just the past. So then came The Embrace by Hank Willis Thomas. And if you've listened to earlier interview that I did a couple of years ago, I talked about The Embrace, which was installed in Boston. It honors Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not through portraiture, but through their joined arms, a literal embrace cast in bronze. The backlash on this was swift. Where are their faces? This isn't what I expected. But the embrace was never about likeness. It was about love, intimacy, legacy, the parts of black life that white-led history often erases in the pursuit of heroic iconography. People wanted familiarity, but this idea of realism. But Hank Willis Thomas offered something more radical. A conceptual monument rooted in gesture rather than form. He asked us to remember how we felt, not just what we saw. And as an artist, isn't it his right to communicate and to explore ideas from his own viewpoint, his own artistry, his own narrative? And maybe that's the deeper issue. These works are not just breaking form, they're breaking expectation. They are untraining the public eye, and for some people, that's deeply unsettling. So I return to this question. Why are we so deeply uncomfortable with monuments that don't look like what we're used to? Why is the Black body, especially the full Black body, feminine, masculine, queer, trans, or non-binary, so open to public critique? Why is a statue of a Black girl, quote unquote, ordinary, but a statue of a white war hero noble? And why must Black public art always explain itself? So let's talk about the body, specifically the full-bodied Black woman, like the one here in this podcast. She's everywhere and yet constantly erased, celebrated when wrapped in performance, mocked when she demands stillness, adored when comedic relief, shamed when sensual or assertive. Her presence in sculpture, as in Grounded in the Stars, disrupts more than just visual expectations. It disrupts the foundations of societal bias. Ideas about value, desirability, power, and control. In Western art history, the ideal figure has often been tall, thin, white, and male. Or, if female, porcelain and fragile. So when a sculpture dares to reflect our bodies, hips, thighs, softness, roundness, it's met with dismay, discomfort, and deflection. Recently, I had a conversation with a friend who is a photographer by the name of Sadi Kali. And if you haven't had an opportunity or you've never heard of him, please check out his work. And we were talking about, well, pretty much I was talking and he stopped me after about 15 or 20 minutes to point out words that I was using in reference to my body type, right? And so I used words like full figure, I used fat ass, and I used a few other terms, because I'm just talking to my friend. And the pause was just sort of a correction, adjust your crown a little bit about the words that are used to express body type and whether or not those words are centering Blackness or a reflection of white dominant language and expectation. And it really made me pause for several days. I thought about every word I'd been using and the origin and the history behind it. So, for instance, when we say plus size in relation to, right? So basically taking a cultural lens to navigate ideas about body type and normalizing difference because of it, right? And so, for instance, when people are working out, for instance, I'm on my own journey, right? Like a lot of other people. But when we are assessing our goals and expectations for ourselves or our progress, are we comparing it to an expectation that was created and placed upon us? Or is it a direct reflection of our own ancestry and people we came from, and from the purview of the beauty and aesthetics and expectations from that? Or are we trying to fit in somewhere else where we don't belong? It's one thing to consider health and wellness, but then there's another thing to consider. Is this a mold you're trying to fit that wasn't made for you? And so reevaluating language. And the reason why I bring this up is because when this sculpture was first unveiled, the criticism and the terms and the words and a lot of what I was seeing on social media, very harsh, and really people are projecting in a way these ideas that they have about people who are full-bodied, right? So the question becomes, who taught us that fullness is a flaw? Why does weight equal worthlessness in the public imagination, especially when carried by a Black woman? Historically, Black women's bodies have been hypervisible and invisible at the same damn time. Displayed without agency, then shamed into silence. From the exploitation of Sarah Baartman in the 19th century to the constant online critiques of contemporary Black women celebrities, the cycle of obsession and rejection just continues. You know, I remember being in college, first learning about Sarah Baartman. And I remember I was introduced to her through this term, Hottentot Venus, which, by the way, is not an accurate term. It's politically incorrect and racist. But one of the things that I remember when I first learned about her was the fact that she was on display and, you know, in spaces where white people could touch her and sort of inspect her because she was from Southern Africa and her body type was exotic to them. When she died, her body was dissected and parts of her were on display in museums. And so it wasn't until, I want to say maybe 15, 20 years ago. It could have been 20 years ago. It just doesn't seem that long ago to me. But I remember distinctly the news that her remains were finally returned to her homeland. And she is a perfect example of a Black woman's body that was very curvy and didn't fit the European standard of beauty or aesthetic. And so it was meant to be exploited. And public art, especially sculpture, offers no escape, you know? The minute a full-figured Black woman is cast in bronze, not for fetish, not for ridicule, but for honor, the public grapples with their own discomfort. It's not the sculpture that's hard to look at. It's the mirror it holds up, and yet fullness has always been tied to power in African diasporic cultures. Full bodies signify abundance, leadership, fertility, and survival. Our ancestors knew that flesh was not failure. It was evidence of life, of resilience. So when people criticize these sculptures, what they're really saying is, I haven't yet learned to honor the bodies I've been taught to ignore. This is where our conversation about art becomes spiritual, emotional, and political. Because to truly confront the discomfort about Black public monuments, we have to ask, what do we want monuments to reflect? Myths or real lives? Who gets to be still and still be honored? I'm going to pause right there. Who gets to? What does it say about our culture that whiteness in stone is classic, but blackness in bronze is controversial? Representation in public space is not just a matter of who is seen. It's about how they are seen. And until we stop demanding that blackness be spectacular to be respected, until we let Black women be ordinary and still divine, until we unlearn our fear of softness, roundness, boldness, we will keep building monuments that honor the past while refusing to reflect the present. So I want to tell you, it's interesting. I teach art history at a local university. And of course, we always start with the art timeline, which begins with prehistory. And in looking at prehistoric art, there are these figurines, right? And it's always an interesting conversation to have with students in regards to like the Venus of Willendorf, the Venus figure. And there are several Venus figures. There's one from Turkey. And these small figurines, are very voluptuous, right? And they have, human features, but not fully detailed. And the Venus of Willendorf is about 4 inches in height. But when I look at it, it's very familiar to me. But when I present it to students, it's amazing how our contemporary lens filters into our understanding of something like a figurine that is voluptuous, right? And so when I ask them to sort of critically think about the meaning and importance and significance of a figure like that to a prehistoric hunter-gatherer, it's interesting, right? Because they immediately go to, terminology related to like fatness or derogatory terminology to sort of, but not understanding that there's value in that, and what does it mean to the richness of that? What does it mean, that it could have some element in value to a society that was prehistoric? And so it's something to reflect on. And I hope that, this podcast will give us all an opportunity to consider our mindsets around bodies and our beliefs about people. I want to leave you with this. What would it mean to honor not just Black history, but Black humanity? Not just Black greatness, but Black being. Are we seeing the work or our projections? And are we witnessing the art or trying to silence the artists? So those are things I want you to think about and maybe discuss in your own personal circles, thoughts around that. Why is whiteness still seen as the default aesthetic standard? Can we ever embrace monuments that tell us uncomfortable truths? What future are we sculpting if we only honor the past that flatters us? So these are the things that have been on my mind, and it actually took me about a week to really gather my thoughts and to consider what I wanted to say. And believe it or not, this is my second time recording this. It's not necessarily an easy topic to talk about body image, right? As a person who is in a fuller figure, to open myself up on this type of platform to have this conversation through the lens of a sculpture that, a wonderful artist with a unique take on life and, representation and willing to use his gifts to continue to challenge status quo. And so I hope that you enjoy this podcast. This has been Iconoclast, and I am Dr. Eden Arlene. If this episode made you think differently about monuments, visibility, or society, what society may celebrate, if it had any type of impact, share it with someone who else may need to see beyond the bronze. Who in your life would, maybe a friend or a colleague. But I'm going to ask you to stay bold and to stay brilliant and stay grounded in the stars. Peace.